You've got a ton of reading, you've got a lot of smart peers, and you've got an intimidating professor. This is peer pressure to overwork, um, especially in the wrong ways if you don't know what the end game is for law school. So this is the response. People go back and they read and they reread and they want to know every single detail of every single case that they read about in class so that they can't be caught off guard. So they'll have all the right answers at their fingertips when they're called on by a professor. So you'll pile on the work. This is Wonder Woman's mom. Now I'm pop culture obsessed and I'm beginning to forget Robin Wright's character's name here, but she's the queen. No, she's the aunt who trains Calliope. But people respond, how did you do well before? You worked really hard. So if you just keep working, maybe you can outwork other people who are equally smart and hardworking. That's the idea. But the result is you end up Antiope, not Calliope. You end up as Boxer from Animal Farm. I will work harder. And Boxer kept working until he was turned to glue. Probably not totally non-toxic kids glue, but whatever. So that is the background. That's what you're kind of going up against heading into law school. Those are the pressures that you will face. What are you supposed to do? I think the most normal coping strategies, we know what we know we don't know, and maybe if we're lucky, we're vaguely aware of what we don't know. So, but the key is that we end up falling back on old habits. So we do what we did in college. We were almost by definition good at college, otherwise you wouldn't be heading to a law school, and especially if you're headed to a fancy law school, you were very good at college. The question is, and obviously this is a trick question, is this the right way to think about law school? Is college a good model for how you should study in law school? Here's college and here's law school. And I think most people kind of tend to think of law school as just college, but kind of more intense. You give up the Frank the Tank days, and you end up, I think this is Susan Estridge, I'm not sure, it's some famous person whose hair stuck up a lot in law school. These are the assumptions that you take from college. You read everything, you take notes on everything, and then you kind of barf it back to the professor, and that should do it. That should actually give you the good results that you have had in the past. But this is what law school is like, given the background that I've given you. And now I'm going to fill in a little more, kind of beyond the pressures of just pile of books, scary peers, scary professor. You're reading the case books, but they're honestly terribly written, and you're trying your best to understand the cases so that you don't get called out in class terribly. Badly written means badly written. Now, the late Justice Antonin Scalia was known for his good writing and was once asked, whatever you think of him, was once asked, like, oh, Justice Scalia, you're so well known for your great legal writing, to which he responded something along the lines of, well, you know, that's not much of a compliment. Legal writing is to writing as military music is to music. The whole field is kind of plagued by really terrible writing. It's not a good example of clarity. It's a great example of people trying to sound smart, and in many cases, if they have bad cases or hard arguments against them, intentional obfuscation. So again, coming back to college, you spend most of your time reading, listening to Professor grill students on cases. You're not likely to be on call that many times, but you're afraid of it. And the rest of the time, you're watching other people get it from the professor. At best, you get someone who is getting kind of the answers that the professor wants to elicit, but you may also get a totally confused student who's not getting there, and then the entire class misses the point. So there's, again, strong pressure to prepare so you don't look stupid in class. This is kind of the key. This is one of the core disconnects in law school. And if you take nothing else away from this webinar, it is, please keep this in mind as you approach law school. You spend most of your time on this crap, but your grades will be driven by the rest of it. You will be graded on a final exam. Most classes are 100% final. There's not midterms at most law schools. There's just the final exam. The exam does not test the kinds of things that were tested in college. It doesn't test your knowledge of the reading or the lecture notes or your ability to regurgitate that, or even your ability to cleverly synthesize a lot of the material that you were required to digest. A law school exam is the resolution of a completely new legal problem that you have not encountered before. It may be in part similar to cases that you've read about before, but in this way, it's almost like math. You can understand the principles that you've been learning, but the final exam isn't isn't asking you, like, what are those principles? How do you, I can't remember anything from like high school calculus, integrate a differential, something like this. It's not that. You get a new problem, and whether you understand the principle is not based on whether you can say what it is, it's whether you can apply it and solve the problem. To be even more specific, the final exam is a fact pattern. It's a set of facts that you've never seen. Can you develop, actually create from scratch and resolve legal claims and defenses? Okay. You develop them, you come up with counter arguments, and you resolve them as if you were a judge. You have all of these pretty sophisticated tasks. And then on top of that, can you do that better than 90 to 95% of your class? That's basically what it takes to get an A. But if you notice, none of this is what you spent the entire semester doing, what was driving you crazy during 13 to 14 weeks of your semester. You weren't asked to solve new legal problems. You were reading previously decided cases and grilled about whether or not they were decided correctly. Did you remember all the facts from a law professor? This is a totally different set of skills than this. And also, realize you never get feedback on the exam that you took unless you ask, and you never get a professor's feedback before the exam. You don't have a midterm. You don't know how you're doing. You have no way to gauge if you're in good shape or horrible shape before an exam. The school doesn't really give you, there's no required way of knowing whether you know what you're doing in terms of this set of skills that you actually need to have on the exam before, until it's too late. So I often, over the years, I've gotten a lot of second semester students who came to me and said, this is an actual quote, I understood the material so well, but my grade just doesn't reflect that. And law school is the first time that a lot of students get crappy grades ever. So let me try and summarize what I think are the major differences between college and law school. I think this applies somewhat less if you did like engineering or math, and a lot more if you were in the humanities or social sciences. College is about passive learning to me, for the most part. this is a generality, but for the most part, it's kind of passive learning. It's the acquisition of knowledge. It's kind of stuffing things into your head. Law school involves a kind of active learning that isn't just knowledge, but it's the application of knowledge. So that's expressed by the next bullet. College is about acquiring knowledge. Law school is about acquiring knowledge and a set of skills. More broadly, college, you have time to adjust. I don't know about you. I was like a public school kid from a totally random state. Reno, thanks, Mom and Dad, for raising me there. And so it took me a while to adjust to college. It took me a semester. But you have time to kind of recover. Your future is still fine if you recover, if you have a bad first semester or even first year. You have 3 more years to improve your grades and still do well. Law school, your first year makes your destiny. A lot of that is because most of the spoils of law school, the plum jobs and clerkships, are available you interview for them right after your first year. Lord knows why you end up spending 2 more years in law school. But the job that you will eventually get out of law school, you interview for that right after your first year, maybe the summer or the fall. But it's only based on your first year grades that you do that, and clerkships are like this as well. College, in a lot of places, there's grade inflation. There's grade inflation where I was. Law school, even if everything is on a B curve and no one gets C's, there's still a hard curve, and employers know the difference between the people who get the top grades, even if it's like a high pass kind of school, and people who don't. There's a hard curve. Whatever the medium is, most people are there. Very few people are getting the top grades. College is is a little more transparent. I mean, there are a lot of terrible teachers, but generally, if you do the work and you do it, you can do well. Law school is honestly a lot about professors hiding the ball. The core disconnect that I mentioned before, the one thing I hope you take away from this webinar, that the things that you do during most of the semester do not in a direct way help you with the final exam. In college, there tend to be resources, or I remember them being advertised in college. If you're not doing well, there were kind of clinics you could go to or tutors you could get. Law school, there isn't so much of that. It's a professional school. I was an officially paid tutor by NYU Law to teach contract and some other things, but for the most part, they don't advertise those very much. I don't remember my first year even knowing that such resources were available.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.